keep one of the things that we're really, where of course everything we do revolves around energy education. It's our mission, but it's also what really excites us. I have a couple of resources I wanted to share with you that maybe you already know about, and you can turn on your mic and be like, this is how I use it. But if it's new to you, I'd love for you to be able to think about how you might incorporate it in your teaching. And it could be even from the younger grades all the way through adult education, because there's a lot that can be teased out of these graphs. And it could just be how to read a graph or some of the greater detail that is in there. So one of the ways we use this animated graph is to show that we have lived through energy transitions before. Currently, our society is transitioning towards renewable energy. As we heard, there's like a political divide that gets amplified perhaps around renewable energy. But this graph allows us to really see that we've been through energy transitions before. In the early 1800s, almost all of our energy came from biomass. And then as we developed the resource of coal, we found it, we developed the technology for extracting it and using it, it got used more. And now we have a really complex energy system where on the left are sources of energy, on the right are cultural uses for that energy. And I'm going to go ahead and just play the animation for you, and maybe one of our co-leaders can drop the link in, and you can look at it for yourself. I love watching this and narrating it. So we start out with coal, with biomass. Coal is discovered. We're in the 1850s. Petroleum is discovered. We're using a bit of hydro and a bit of wind. Now natural gas is discovered. Electricity we start having that secondary energy source of converting the primary energies into electricity. Energy is distributed for electricity for residential and industrial uses. Natural gas becomes a greater part of the mix in the 1960s, where the belt, the top part of the graph, that's electricity, continues to grow and grow and grow. And here as we approach this century, we can see all the different sources of energy, and as well how our energy use contracts in some areas and expands in others. I love being able to look at this over and over again. Some cool things that you can do on here is each of these mileposts in here, we can click on it and get an energy history fact. So right there is an opportunity for you and your students to learn a bit more about energy history in the United States. I really like the 1882 one because I live in the Fox Valley. Thomas Edison provided the first public electricity sales in the US, lighting Appleton, Wisconsin with DC from a hydroelectric plant on the Fox River. And you can actually go to a house that's on the Fox River and learn about this at the museum that's there. Something that I did when I showed this to you is I toggled off showing waste electricity. That's another way that you can use this, is you can turn it on. And if we were going to, okay, I'll let it rerun here. I won't go all the way through. Let's see if I think I can drag it to the end. No, I can't. Okay, but as it goes along, you'll see that a half to 2/3 of our electricity is actually lost in transmission. And so there's a really deep opportunity for students to think, and for all of us to think about how we use electricity, being efficient with the electricity we have, but also how do we distribute electricity? Why are we, that means we're extracting way more than we need, or we can be much more efficient in that whole process. So that's something that you can look at. And then up here, there's all sorts of background data that can be explored as well, for where did they get this data from for developing these graphs. So the light orange here is all the waste electricity, and the dark orange is the electricity that we're actually using. And to me, that's really, really startling. I'm curious, of the people who are here, has anybody used this before in their teaching? If so, I'd love for you to turn off your unmute yourself and share how you've used it. All right.
This is Eileen. I was just going to say I've never actually seen it before, and it's really cool. I feel like I should, as like our state environmental ed person, like I should have known that existed, but I've never seen it, and it's awesome and really good timing because we are needing to do some updating to our energy resources curriculum, and I'm just looking for good things for teachers to use. So I'm very excited about that.
Oh, great. Glad to hear that. I wish I was racking my brain actually just last night trying to remember where I originally came across this. So if it's one of my colleagues who shared it with me, thank you. Own it. But I've shared it so many times with all sorts of energy people, and they're always like, this is awesome. So tying back to where I was saying about energy lost and transmission, that then kind of, we love using Project Drawdown as a framework for our teaching, and it ties so well into all types of environmental education, because no matter what we're looking at, we're either looking at sources of carbon or sinks for carbon and the space in which they interact in the atmosphere. So the oceans are a source for carbon, or a sink for carbon, and then the landmass, all the photosynthesis that's happening with plants is another sink for the carbon. But what we are putting out into the atmosphere from our cultural practices, most of that remains in the atmosphere. 59% of that remains there. So if we could, in our electricity production, if we could be more efficient, we'd be shrinking that part of the orange band that's going up into the atmosphere. And I feel like that is a really compelling point that, for me anyhow, is why I'm an energy educator. Project Drawdown actually has, you can probably see it in my background, I've got the Project Drawdown framework up on my wall. I refer to that all the time. But the flip side, or a companion piece to the sources and sinks in Project Drawdown, are what the solutions are. And this is something that I need, and we all need, in helping our students kind of find their way. Like, they know climate change is a problem. They want to find out how they can be problem solvers for that. And there's lots of places that they can come in and do that. One is in reducing the sources. So there's electricity, our agricultural, industrial practices, and transportation, and how buildings are using energy. And then supporting the sinks. So if somebody is like, I really want to be a marine biologist, that's awesome. Even if you're in Michigan or Wisconsin, like, that's needed too, because those are really, really important sinks. And so any career or major that we have students that are leaning towards, we have the opportunity to help them see that if they're passionate about that, they have the opportunity to bend that towards being a climate solution. And then the third part of this is it's probably the most important part of this, is improving society and having equity for all. When people's needs are met and they are fulfilled, we're all working towards a just and equitable society. I'm going to pull it off the wall behind me, and this is off script completely, but Sandra Steingraber is an ecologist and writer, and her words, like, I think about this all the time. It's about knowing what you're good at and knowing that other people know what they're good at, and we're all doing the thing we're good at, but we're all going in the same direction. But she says it eloquently. We are all musicians in a great human orchestra, and it is now time to play the Save the World Symphony. You are not required to play a solo, but you are required to know what instrument you hold and play it as well as you can. You are required to find your place in the score. That is so uplifting to me. Like, I can't do it all, but together we are doing it all.
So I'm going to get started with a presentation on Wiki, and Galisa, I believe is how it's pronounced, which is the new resource that I became more familiar with in preparing for this. We're going to talk a little bit about what those two organizations are and what they provide as resources for educators related to scientific knowledge about climate change, touch on a few other resources, and then hopefully give you some time to explore some of those resources and climate change adaptation strategies on your own as well. So the first organization that I want to introduce is the WICI, which is the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. And this is an organization that I became familiar with probably around 2013, 2014. I attended, I don't know if many of you attended any of Kat Techman's workshops in the past, or yesterday, or not, maybe not yesterday, maybe it was Monday in the event where she was sharing with traditional ecological knowledge. But I was blessed to be part of a group of educators who went to a climate camp with her quite a few years ago. We camped up on the shores of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. And while we were there, we learned about scientific knowledge related to climate change and the impact in that area, and some of that traditional ecological knowledge. And while we were there, Dr. Dan Vimont from the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts came and shared the first assessment report and a link to all these resources and beautiful maps that could help us understand what had happened in the past in Wisconsin and what was changing in Wisconsin due to climate. And so the resources that WICI provides are fantastic. I'm just going to click on this link and hopefully, do you see the website now? Okay, perfect. So the website here is a great resource. It includes the most updated assessment report, which is quite long. I do think there are great parts of it and aspects that are useful as educators. If you take the time to open it later, they have little stories and spotlights from around the state. So definitely places that you might be able to connect to with your students in the classroom and engage them in part of the reading. It's also great if you are, in any discipline, but looking at supporting like the reading and understanding of science or technical materials. So you can, pull apart pieces to use for that. In addition to the reports that are available, there are also these science-based strategies to address climate change, and they're broken down into 14 different categories. And we're going to spend a little time with those just in a little bit, but just wanted to kind of give you a brief look at or glance at what the website offers. Do you see my presentation screen again? Perfect. One of the resources that I really like the most, and I encourage you to look at, are these little fact sheets. It kind of condenses everything that's in the big report into something real usable. That's where I would start with students in any case, before you dive into something deeper. In addition to just the WICI documents and information, they also have maps. And the first one, if you have the slideshow open still, I would invite you to click on the link for this one. And what it is you can pick a city, and what it does is it shows you with projections what your city might feel like in 60 years. So I live in close to Wausau, Wisconsin. So if I type in Wausau, Wisconsin, it will zoom in, and in the high emissions scenario in 2028, a typical summer will be similar to what it's like in southern Iowa. And so if you want to take a moment and just click on your location, it doesn't have absolutely every location in Wisconsin and Michigan, but it does have quite a few that you could find someplace maybe close to where you're at and kind of see. But I feel like it's very interesting to consider that and look at that. If we don't make any changes and we still continue emitting the way that we're emitting in 2080, this is what we might look like or feel like. And then on the website, there are also, and here I've linked documents that we've shared in our Google Drive so that they're easy for you to download and use with your students, but they're also available on the WICI Maps website. And so that interactive mapping tool is first under trends and projections, but then they have all the historical maps related to annual precipitation, minimum temperatures, maximum temperatures, and things like that. Along with, if you scroll down to the bottom, the future projections. And so one of the activities that we did this morning was to have you create post-its about things that you've noticed. And so what I love to do with students is, if you take the time to look at those things you've noticed, can you find a map that explains the science behind what your observation was. If you can find a map that explains it, then maybe you're onto something. Maybe what you've noticed is related to climate. If there isn't a map that's related to it, that doesn't mean that your notice is not related to climate. It just means we might have to find some other resources or look into it. And so I noticed in a lot of them, there was information about large rainfall events. And I know if you drive around many parts of Wisconsin, you see a lot of the county roads are replacing their culverts because they have exceeded capacity with so many rainfall events. And so if you look, you can see the historical trends in precipitation, but then you can also look at the projections in the days per year with more than 1 inch, or days per decade with more than 2 inches of rain in one day. And even up to days per 100 years with more than 5 inches of precipitation in one day. And we've had days like that throughout Wisconsin and Michigan, where it's not been 100 years in between those 5-inch rainfall events. And so this is a great resource for showing students the science that confirms some of the observations that they might be making. And the maps are all free to use. They want you to download them. They want the maps to be used more often. So those historical trends and future projections maps are great. If you want to on your own time, we have some links to some KEEP lessons that we've recently added the maps to show you how you could use them as part of just curriculum or resources that you want to have in lessons that already exist in your classrooms or your programming. But then some ideas that I've had in the past for using the maps in other lessons. A lot of times we need to focus on scientific writing and using evidence and that. And so the wiki maps are great for having students create statements on, why their observations may be linked to climate. And so just some great tools that are available to you free of charge through those websites. Since we have people from Michigan in our cohort as well, I wanted to make sure there were resources available to them. And the Great Lakes, and it's now CAP, but it used to be a RESA program, but they work in a similar fashion to Wiki, but for the entire Great Lakes region. And when I looked at their resources, a lot of their information comes from University of Michigan and Michigan State. But similar to Wiki, they have an annual report. They have a climate change summary. If you look, they have a whole website, just like Wiki, that talks about what they do, shows their resources and tools. Again, it's not a site that's meant just for educators. It's a site that's meant for everyone. But as an educator, you can use their resources and tools similar to what we use Wiki for at KEEP. Looking more specifically at their maps, they are created by the same organization, the Nelson Institute out of the University of Wisconsin. And so they'll look familiar to some of the wiki maps. This one here, I think the number of days falling below 20, that's significant for a lot of those observations people made about winters, is if you're having fewer days below 20, you're not going to have that snowpack or the same type of winters that you're used to in our areas. The biggest difference that I noticed between this website and maps from Wiki is that they just have the projection maps. They don't have the historical ones. So if you want to do a comparison to what have we seen and what we might see, the wiki maps are going to be a better resource for that. But these are excellent in looking at the whole Great Lakes region. I'm going to go back to the presentation, but want to just ask Eileen to jump in real quick, because she shared a resource this morning when we were in our small groups that might be of particular interest to our our Michigan participants about the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. So if you don't mind, Eileen, if I put you on the spot, if you could just talk about that for one moment, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Sure. So I put a couple things in the chat just to mention. Michigan is in the middle of updating some of our climate change educational curriculum, and we are trying to pull together some more map-based resources specifically for teachers to use in the classroom. We're working with Esri and with our GIS folks in our agency to try to pull together some of that resources. So if you're a Michigan teacher and there are specific types of maps you want to see. For example, the historical data, please shoot me a note, let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. That'll help us figure out how to use our limited funds in the best way. But yeah, Michigan, most of you maybe have heard, is one of few states that has a really bold climate plan in place that is statewide and economy-wide. There was an article in the New York Times about Michigan's plan a couple weeks ago and it was funny because I was like, I don't really love being described as like typically a laggard behind, but it's nice that they were saying that like we're doing something good now. So yeah, they've got this site up there, the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. I just dropped a link in the chat that goes directly to the plan if you want to take a look at it. And this is the state's plan for specifically reducing greenhouse gas emissions and carbon in a major scale. So it's a mitigation focused plan. It's really looks at greenhouse gas emissions. It looks at transportation, industry, like system-wide changes that need to occur to get us to, I think the ultimate goal, it's like 30% below 2005 greenhouse gas emissions levels by 2030 and 50% below by 2050, with a goal of having total economy-wide decarbonization by 2050. So it's big goals. There's a lot of things in there, but it has some cool pieces, some really good connections to environmental justice that are in there on what that transition will look like. Caveat being, it is, like I said, mitigation focused. There's not much in this plan in terms of what adaptation will look like. That's being done by different groups. So for example, our water resource division at the state is working on what does adaptation look like in terms of stormwater management and water quality. So this plan is mitigation focused, and it has one of the things that Bridget, who's also on the call, and I and some others in Michigan are working on is building out what does it look like to provide the education that's necessary in order for us to achieve these goals, because this plan does not include anything about education other than some broad workforce development goals. So if you're in Michigan or just interested in what Michigan's doing, the plan is actually pretty easy read, and it's really interesting to see what's happening. And they're just in the process now through our Office of Climate and Energy working on a huge greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the state. So that'll be really cool to have. That will be a spatial database that'll be publicly available. So once that as that inventory is ongoing, I can share that resource out and you can see kind of where we're at and how we're doing going forward. So, but I will say map wise, I mentioned this in our breakout group this morning, the GLISA maps are where I tend to go as well. They're the best that are available at this point in time.
Thanks so much, Eileen. I really appreciate your jumping in and sharing. And it's wonderful to know that Michigan has so many resources to support educators. And, you know, while we're different states, we do have some of the same impacts because of all those wonderful lakes around us that tend to moderate somewhat. Well, they've moderated temperatures for years, but as we've learned, they have not protected us from the impacts of climate change. We're actually seeing a lot of increases that I think a lot of people thought wouldn't happen in our area because of all that water and that. So thanks very much for sharing. Moving on, there are some other resources that I'm not going to go through right now, but I wanted to have linked in the presentation for you to use and look at in case you hadn't come across them in any of the workshops you participated in thus far. These are ones that were highlighted in the Midwest cohort last year that Climate Gen presented that included most of the states that were just in the maps on the previous slide. So there's a 4th National Climate Assessment, and they have a whole chapter devoted just to the Midwest. And it divides it into specific types of concerns related to climate change, and a great resource or tool that you can use with students or just for your own benefit and knowledge. The NOAA also has some state climate summaries, which I find are interesting to use and share. And so there's one for Wisconsin and one for Michigan that I've linked there, but you can look up any state if you have students who are interested in looking at what is happening elsewhere. And then a little less interactive, but still having information is just a report on the assessment of the impacts of climate change on the Great Lakes area. So those are all science-based resources that are produced by people that are trusted sources of information related to climate change. So definitely things that I recommend using when you're working with your students.
So my name is Jose Basaldua. As Victoria mentioned, I'm with an organization, local nonprofit based out of here in Milwaukee called Reflo, Sustainable Water Solutions. We've been around for about 10 years now. We just had our 10-year this year, back in February. And pretty much our mission is to really catalyze sustainable water use across Milwaukee. A lot of it being involved in doing a lot with the green infrastructure and bringing forth equitable water resource management to be able to support a variety of outcomes and objectives for our organization, but at the same time, help implement a variety of water projects throughout our local communities here in Milwaukee. On the screen, you'll see the 5 departments that we have. Program areas that we work with. First one here on the left is our Green and Healthy Schools program. I'll actually talk a little bit more about that because that is the primary focus for today. And then the next one over is innovative placemaking. That one is really just being able to go out to public spaces. A lot of them are underutilized or need a little bit of love to redevelop them. And so that's where we partner with some other groups to be able to bring forth some redevelopment and really innovate spaces to be able to make them usable and fun public spaces for communities. The one you have pictured right here is Fondy Food Market up on Fond du Lac and I believe 27th. If you've never been there, feel free to definitely go up there one day, especially when the farmers market going on. It's definitely a lot of people there. The next one over is our Milwaukee water stories, and that's where we have our Milwaukee community map, which I'll also be highlighting in our presentation for today. And there's a lot of great stories that come forth into there, in addition to having a cool Google Earth platform to be able to dive into a variety of different stories and check out a lot of projects. Rainwater harvesting for urban agriculture is another area that we'd definitely like to support. This one's more focused on some of those public areas, some public urban gardens, some other groups that want and being able to utilize captured rainwater on their site. And so then we're able to come in and being able to provide some support resources, other connections to other groups who will also be able to lend a hand. And then our last one is our environmental internships program. We have 2 tracks. We have a school year program and a summer program. And again, with this program, I'll bring in some highlights with that as well. But for today, heat is definitely a concern here in Milwaukee. Heat has been brought up throughout some of the sessions that I've been a part of so far here at the Summer Institute. And in some areas, we have had a couple of heat islands pop up. The map that you see right here shows Milwaukee County, and this is available through the Heat Vulnerability Index report that is linked here. After presentation, this slideshow will be shared, and so you'll be able to access this as well. And so they definitely utilize a color scale to be able to show, vulnerability from low being that yellow color to high being those darker red colors. And just a quick description as to how the EPA labels some of these heat islands is that, they give a little explanation as to a variety of structures, roads, definitely that kind of infrastructure absorbs and re-emits the heat a lot more than some of these natural landscapes, such as forests and water bodies. And in some urban areas, there's a very high concentration of some of these features, which then is sometimes connected to limited greenery as well, causing a lot of these areas to become these heat islands and really just produce high temperatures that could cause some harm over time. Here, just another map. This one coming in from the Heat Watch Milwaukee report. This one again using similar color scales, but this one does a little pretty well in just highlighting some of the areas. And in this particular example, just to the right of the slide, it gives a little explanation as to how asphalt can really concentrate and give off a lot of heat. So heat, a lot of heat, a lot of urban areas, a lot of asphalt cement that contributes to this. And here in this next slide, just some other causes of some of these heat islands, again, as mentioned, that reduce natural landscape in urban areas. Oddly enough, some of the properties in some of these urban materials Some of the things used there, especially for such as the pavements or for roofing, they definitely absorb and emit more of the sun's heat compared to some of that greenery, such as trees. So that definitely plays a big part. That's one that I didn't really know too much about until I really started looking into it. So that was new information for me. Of course, the geometry of certain structures, certain buildings, for one, wind is definitely directed in more particular ways. And, one example I did give is, certain structures are tall enough and positioned in a certain way, then wind won't be able to provide certain cooling effects that it may tend to do. And just continuing on, you have heat generated from human activities, especially if there's other equipment such as air conditioning being called for. And then weather and geography. Certain times of clear weather and calm conditions actually may result in more of that heat island effect because it then maximizes the amount of solar energy really reaching some of these surfaces. And then just some, too far. Here, just to show some impacts that we definitely see coming off of the heat island effect. You have that increased energy consumption, going back to that AC need, in addition to some other things that may be needed to be able to support those higher temperatures. Higher emissions of air pollutants and greenhouse gases. The more we're wanting to use such equipment, for example, to be able to cool ourselves off, there's going to be energy needed to be able to power that equipment. So power producers are then going to have to emit a little bit more to keep that power demand and supply available. Risk to human health, people of a variety of ages, certain age groups definitely more vulnerable to others, such as heat stroke, heat exhaustion. But then if people have underlying effects already, those may be exaggerated a little bit more. And impaired water quality. One that people sometimes don't think about is that water, when it's traveling to certain pipes, and especially if it's like really high temperatures, could get heated. And then temperature fluctuations in water could then have an ecological effect on certain creatures, making changes there, and then affecting cascading effects that could potentially then reach us as humans. So what is Reflo doing to be able to combat some of these heat island effects? Again, one of our bigger project departments that we have is our Green and Healthy Schools program. This is definitely one of our bigger ones where we provide a lot of that help. A lot of schools around here in Milwaukee are heavy on asphalt, cement, causing some of those heat island effect issues, so where just a lot of heat gets produced. But then also looking at winter, there's some schools that have had issues with icing on the ground, and then potential of students getting injured in that way. And so we come in, we are able to come in and get some feedback from the school. We work with them to be able to really plan things out, hear from them what they would like on the playground. At the same time, Reflo and some other partners that we work with, we come in and provide some input as far as what potential green infrastructure could be put in place, in addition of providing green infrastructure that could be used for teaching outdoors and really providing that connection for students to nature, both educationally and recreationally. It provides a good opportunity to be able to kids outdoors more. Here is a nice map showcasing just again the size of the area that we're trying to reach out to. Right now we are mainly working with MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools. The variety of dots that you see here are most of the campuses, or all the campuses that MPS has that is under MPS. And at the same time, a lot of the school, there's some information here that highlights how many students are served by the district, how many are some financial economic information for the student group, how many are in special needs and so forth. But the other big one right there at the end is, there's over 500 acres of impervious surface throughout all these schools. The other cool thing I'll show again, remind people, is that this information, these maps are available on our community map. Again, just highlighted here on the slide for you to be able to access and explore. But this map, this feature right here shows, again, some of the schools that have gone through construction already. On the upper left is a legend showcasing, the different phases in the redevelopment process. Each year we bring on 5 new schools to be able to start them on usually a 3, sometimes 4-year process, but usually under 3. Usually at 3 years is when things get completed, starting from that conceptual design in that first year, all the way through to completing the construction toward that 3rd year. After construction, then a little bit of that maintenance and stewardship comes in to be able to help maintain those spaces and keep them up and running. Here is a good example of, again, a before picture about how some of these schools and some of the issues affected with them. One of the things for us being a water focused organization, we do take into consideration water flows, the watershed positioning at some of these school sites. And so some of these schools definitely have certain areas where water likes to flow more than others. And so that's where we definitely consider when designing things and laying out certain features, especially that green infrastructure, the best location for them to be able to make them give them best efficiency, be able to do that stormwater management. Here, a good example of Cleveland Avenue School, one of the schools that we work with a little information about how green infrastructure really is able to help manage that runoff by helping manage it on site, and then either slowly releasing it back into the system after it's been stored in the ground. Some spaces they like to utilize the stored water, and so then we work with them to be able to figure out a situation or a way for them to be able to utilize that captured rainwater. Some of the things that we definitely do to be able to, again, work with, do at these schools is that deep paving and really replacing it with more porous ground cover to help capture that stormwater on site. Cisterns above ground and underground are features that we like to place as well at some of these project sites. Naturalizing some of the spaces into native prairies and stormwater tree areas or tree areas to be able to, again, provide additional green space for that stormwater management, allow those greens to be able to absorb that water, but at the same time provide some spaces for educational opportunities. Continuing on with some additional examples, bioswales are a big one that we like to be able to utilize at these project sites. This one is a really good example because it really shows that it's flooded. It's intentionally supposed to flood when it rains, and then it'll slowly over time just release that water. Natural grass play spaces. We also look at some turf fields as well to be able to provide that good stormwater management. And again, some more pictures of trees and cisterns as well. Here is a good example of the school that we saw before. This is Longfellow's Longfellow Public School here in Milwaukee. And then this is a before, and then the picture that I just showed is the after. So a lot of big difference, a lot of change, again, to be able to provide new green spaces for that stormwater management, for that stormwater management, but at the same time being able to provide those new recreational spaces and educational opportunities for teachers. And just another example, and next two slides are just some quick examples. This is Vincent High School. They were able to put in a variety, a high number of trees to be able to create a forest for themselves out there. We were actually out there doing some pruning last month, so that was a good activity right there. Again, some before and after shots here. Nice big area full of asphalt and cement, and then being able to come in and really redevelop that to make it better for the school and for also the city area of Milwaukee, again, to be able to help with that stormwater management. But I keep saying stormwater management, but there's also, ways that the heat island effect is reduced. For one, the stormwater trees, or the trees in general getting planted, they're able to provide a lot of shade available for students, especially during those warmer months, and really being able to help cool off some of those areas. Again, also being able to provide places for teachers to actually take their students outside. Some schools, they don't have really much of cover or anything on their playgrounds, and once they are able to go through this process, they're really grateful in having that particular space. I am in 15 minutes, and I will definitely stop when I'm told to. Otherwise, I'll keep going. I think I maybe have a couple other minutes more to go, but please feel free to stop me when you need to. So yeah, so the heat island effect is definitely commented by the trees. In addition to just providing that green space on the ground, it does help absorb and dissipate that heat a lot better, easier than on that hard, porous, impervious surface such as that cement and asphalt. So again, just showing some pictures here about the different ways you're able to really engage students, and not just students, all ages, I would say, that have interest in exploring some of these spaces. Again, I've been talking about some of the school sites, but there are other public spaces as well to be able to visit throughout the area of Milwaukee to check out and see some of the differences and changes that have happened.
Jose, there was a question in the chat here from Eileen. She asked, what kind of funding sources do you tend to find to support this work?
I will say a little bit, and I do have my colleague Lisa Neeb here, who is also feel free to jump in and be able to add some more to that. But a lot of the funding, a good amount of funding comes from grants. That particular funding source, I believe we look at federal and state level funding available. There's also some local foundations that we have connections with and work with who support the work that we do. And so they're able to provide some funding toward these projects because they themselves are having similar missions, connections, especially in making a better environment for the youth and providing something good for their future. And so there's that mission alignment that really helps us out in just gathering that support and helping accomplish these projects. I'll pause right there, see if Ms. Neeb has anything else to add to that.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Neeb, Green and Healthy Schools Program Manager with Reflo. Just to add, so each school or each calendar year, we add 5 schools to this process of schoolyard redevelopment. So it's a cohort model where we move schools through. And when we hit that fundraising phase, we're fundraising for 5 large school projects at a time. And we've been averaging about $6 million raised to support that cohort of schools. Majority of that funding does come from larger federal level grants, like Jose mentioned. A lot of that is tied to green infrastructure improvements that removes the asphalt, puts in the green infrastructure, green space for play, for environmental benefits, as well as really rich in learning opportunities. And then we have some of those local state level grants, private philanthropy, and then each of the schools we work with has a very active green team that's part of the process, and they do school level fundraising as well to contribute to the projects.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, and so just as Lisa was talking, I just wanted to jump to this particular slide, showing the variety of partners that definitely provide their support, and we're very thankful for their support because without them, we wouldn't be able to do as much work as we're able to do to this day. And every year we are still growing, and so we're able to take on a little bit more and more every year. But a lot, especially for the Green and Healthy Schools program, there's been a lot of great support over the years, and each year we're thankful that we get new people on board and being able to share what's worked with us with others, because again, not only are we helping combat with that stormwater, or helping with that stormwater management, but again, with the heat island effects, being able to help reduce just those high heats on some of these playgrounds, in addition to the other public spaces that we work with. And the other big one is, I think, the educational component. We definitely take pride and make a lot of good effort to be able to make connections with people and give them, again, the appropriate information in a good way to be able to allow them to really connect with said information. The other one that's been working with us is, again, on that community map. We've been able to gather a lot of good testimonials, personal testimonials from people throughout the area of Milwaukee. And I think that's another good resource, another good thing to show, especially the youth in our areas, locally, what are people doing, who they're able to reach out to. And I'll just give a plug for the session we had yesterday. There was one about, talking about your and really being proud and highlighting your local environmental justice heroes. And I think, giving opportunity for youth to be able to connect with local heroes like that, it definitely, I've seen them get inspired by some of the work that they're seeing. And I think that's just what they need. Sometimes it's just getting connected with somebody they're comfortable with communicating with and talking with on their level, and you know, being able to really express themselves and gain some guidance to be able to really do their part passionately, because that's what they want to do, and they just need a little bit of help of guidance getting to these resources and people. Let's see. I guess the last thing I'll end on is just showing a couple of pictures of our internship programs. We do have that school year round program and summer program. So this is another one where we take opportunity to be able to relay that information, interpret that climate education information, connecting with high school youth. And then also, especially in the summer, giving them a chance to be able to do some land restoration, conservation throughout some of the project sites that we do. And then the school year, that particular group or cohort is able to come together and really work on choosing a topic or a project that they would want to achieve for their school and or community that one way or another has an environmental impact connected to it. And then I believe there's going to be some talk about some tools able to be used. And so when we had the opportunity to be able to use some tools from the energy kit to again highlight the effects of just even providing that redevelopment to school sites. And I'll give everybody a big wow moment right now, even just looking at, for instance, the example right here in the area where we took some readings underneath the plants, right on the cement, and you know, a partial shaded area, and we were seeing differences of about 5 to 10 degrees from really close areas, you know, from shaded, partial shaded, no shade, you know, within a small area. So there's really a big difference, and these tools really allowed us to be able to let the kids use them and gain some knowledge as to you know, what it is they're seeing, why we're doing the projects that we do, and how it's impacting everybody in getting these projects done.
So I want to just transition us to our next educator who is here with us today, Leigh Kohlmann. Leigh recently retired from the Waupun School District. So we're going to head from a very urban place, Milwaukee, to Waupun, Wisconsin, where you may not even know where that is because it doesn't always get on the map. So I am going to share, let Leigh share her story about integrating urban heat island education, climate change education in this very small community.
Just a quick thumbs up. Are you able to see my screen? Excellent. Okay, so I was part of a work group in not last year, but the year before, around the book, Gholdy Muhammad's book, Cultivating Genius. And much of what you're going to see here was an application of that work. So I am on the historical lands of the Ho-Chunk, and we've seen this map frequently. I wasn't sure if this would be shared out, so I'm sharing it out now. Session description. Gholdy Muhammad, in her inspiring book, Cultivating Genius, really brought equity to the forefront of lesson design. In this presentation, we'll discuss the framework, noting how to connect students' identities, help them find joy in science learning, and we'll employ Dr. Muhammad's pursuit of criticality. So I'll explain what those pursuits are in just a moment, but we'll be reframing we'll be reframing our teaching around the topic of heat islands. Specifically, we're going to be looking at examining an instructional sequence called It's Getting Hot Out There, Visualizing Thermal Energy and Heat Islands. You'll have access to that instructional sequence. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the story of our children and their families always begins and ends with their genius and joy. This means we don't open with our low achievement scores, dropout rates, achievement gaps. And I'd like to acknowledge this slide is from Kevin Anderson, the science DPI consultant for the state of Wisconsin. Additionally, this slide is also from Kevin. Educational equity means that every student has access to the resources and educational rigor that they need at the right moment. So here's a copy or a cover of Goldie Muhammad's book, and within this book, her main message is that our job as educators is not only to teach skills, but to teach students to know, validate, and celebrate who they are. Please feel free to unmute and let me know if there's something I need to change or adapt so that this presentation is more supports you where you're at. This is new to me, so presenting in this format. So please help me out if there's something I need to change or adjust. Goldie Muhammad's framework has many names. Generally, the group that I have been working with, we call it the Cultivating Genius Framework, and there are 5 pursuits: the pursuit of identity, pursuit of skill, intellect, criticality, and joy. So I'll give you just a moment if you want to read through these particular description of these particular pursuits, and I will speak about them in just a moment or two. A quick summary, a quick perusal of the information, and you would see that skills and intellect are ones that teachers naturally gravitate towards. We understand that. Intellect, I'd like to expand our thinking on this one just a little bit. In science, we use phenomenon-based learning. NGSS, three-dimensional learning, is really founded on an anchoring phenomenon. So I find that affirming that Goldie Muhammad recognizes that phenomenon-based learning is within the intellect. I'd also like to point out, and this took me a while to figure out as I did a book study with this topic, that identity speaks not only to my identity or my students' identity about ourselves, but it's also about people who are different from us. So that was a real eye-opener as I constructed lessons for this project. And then criticality, how does my instruction help students understand and disrupt oppression? It's also the beauty of humanity and changing the world. And then joy is elevating that and centering that beauty and truth in humanity. What we tried to do with our work group is employ the Cultivating Equity framework to reframe any lesson. So that was like a micro goal, and then a macro goal was then so if we take the framework into an existing lesson, what can I do to that existing lesson to better reach the pursuits? And then we went on and said, well, how might we take those pursuits and start over? Completely design something new, co-construct something new. So as I was working with implementing the framework, the first thing I did was I started with those 5 pursuits right here. You'll see them, and also how to layer rich text with a centering voice and rich text from a variety of authors. So in my lesson plans, I dropped in just as my always focal point, does this resource, which if this were a live link, I would link to a lesson. Does this resource, can I do like, well, how many of these boxes? Now we get away from that box checking. It's more than that. It's more like a framework and a thinking, but this really helps me keep my focus. So that framework can go on top of lessons, or you can organically build the lessons out from that. So for organically cultivating genius, it really starts with student ideas and questions, which aligns really well with my belief system and the National Research Council framework, which is that foundational document in 2012 for the NGSS. Basically, it's saying that iterative learning develops from within the student, and it strategically frames that learning within the 5 pursuits. So if we start with a storyline that begins with an anchoring phenomenon, We harness student curiosity using the driving question board. And then this is all on that foundation of establishing classroom culture and norms, productive and equitable participation in science discourse. I'm intentionally leaving the slides on the side so that you can, if you're like me, I like to see where I've been and where I'm going. So if you're that kind of thinker, I'm leaving this for you. And I'm also leaving some speaker notes that have annotations and citations on the bottom. So feel free to use those. Okay, so how did this all come about? Like where did the inspiration come from? Thermal energy is a topic in most curricula. And it's not necessarily very personal and connected. So I was teaching a thermal energy unit using Amplify curriculum. I've also used the same heat island instructional strategy set with Open SciEd. So I'll make that connection a little bit. So my dog is alerting me that there's something going on outside. It's a real space here, so apologize for that. So anyways, we were outside looking at, my students and I were outside looking at snow shadows. And in that snow shadow phenomenon, they came up with these questions for our driving question board that had already existed on our wall around thermal energy. So how do different materials affect temperature, and how does the color of an object affect temperature? So from that, I connected, that's kind of like the phenomenon of a heat island phenomenon. So the story of the data doesn't really start with the data trends. I really wanted to have my students, I didn't even introduce the phenomenon yet, that's in lesson 2, but I wanted them to understand the impact of this section of the graph. So then move to some place-based centering around the concepts of materials, light energy, thermal energy, vegetation, land, and water. The lesson has, it's about a 10 lesson sequence. It's very adaptable to what you need. And I'll show you how to download that in just a little bit or save it. Basically, it's exploring these questions. How can humans lessen the impact of harsh effects of heat? That's the one I'll show you the most. Then surface cover affecting temperature. This ties in really well with the previous speaker, Jose, speaking about materials affecting surface temperature. How might human activities impact those temperatures in different communities? And then finally, how might we mitigate the effects of heat islands? So this is where I think I'm going to place in the chat. And actually, if I could have one of my co-hosts place this link in the chat. And if you are able to then open this resource, it'll look like this. It's all going okay with that? All right. So if I enter here on the top, heat islands, and I hit search, and I'm not sure, it's really slow. There we go. If I hit search, then I can see that this is one of many resources on WiseLearn. Victoria would do a more thorough job of explaining what WiseLearn is, but basically it's a place that houses curated lessons for the state of Wisconsin. And if I Google or search within the site heat islands, there are a number of heat island resources that come up, and it's getting hot out here is here, the one that's on the top. So I'm going to jump back to the slide deck now. And I have, how did I make this connection back to the heat island phenomenon? So I mentioned earlier that you could take any thermal energy unit, and it takes a little bit of creativity on the teacher's part. Like how do you connect what's happening in your classroom with one unit to the next? So what I had done is then we went outside again And we were investigating the concept of how does color of an object affect temperature. So I just had them take qualitative measurements first, going, comparing different colors and different materials on the map or on the surface. Could I have somebody just like jump in and say that you can hear me and that everything is okay? I need a little bit of confirmation.
You're doing great, Leigh. This is fabulous.
Good.
Looks good, sounds good.
I'm so not used to this format, and I've intentionally, I'm not going to go there, but thank you. I needed that validation that things were okay. So then we bounced off that idea. How do different materials affect temperature? Eventually we did quite a bit of data collection around that. So this is where we are. This is why we're doing it. This is where we go. And I think if you've done thermal energy units, you might have done this in the past with your students. The use of infrared thermometers, it makes it a completely different lab and so much easier to use. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. And then eventually we take that and we apply it, what makes cities hot investigation, which I modified from NASA resources. Okay, so student-driven inquiry is elevating. It elevates the student agency. So how do we take the driving question board on thermal energy and repopulate it so that it's now about the heat islands? What I did was I took their student questions and then I reframed those questions into more of a driving question. As you can see from the driving question board here, how does color of an object affect temperature? How does surface cover affect surface temperature? And then how do different materials affect temperature? I reframed that. How might human activities contribute to extreme heat? So basically we took one driving question board and we're repopulating another driving question board. And I start with the question, I use what's called I just do an attendance question. It kind of kicks us off every day. And the attendance question for the very first first lesson plan is, what is your favorite way to cool off on a hot summer day? Sometimes we do this orally, sometimes we do it on a Post-it note. This time we did it on a Post-it note. I'm going to jump back now to the Wise Learn resources for a moment, and I'm actually going to open the resource. So this is a link. And I can, here's a description of the resource. You'll notice that many of the authors of this resource are within our organization and presenting to us today. So I will view the resource now. And it depends on how you like to get your information. Something I appreciate about Wise Learn and the way Victoria's loaded this, there's more than one way. So I'm just going to really highlight a couple of resources and then I'm going to show you a Google Doc. Here's that idea about rich and layered text, images, and the essential questions for the unit, learning targets, cultivating genius goals, grouping them with identity, skill, intellectual criticality, and joy. So there's that framework for the instructional sequence. And then some assessments that were built in. One of my favorite is extreme heat multi-generational interview. And here students interview people in their family or their community about how things were similar or different, and then projecting into the future, what are some things they think might be, what's technology in the future that might help us mitigate or adapt to, especially adapt to extreme heat. So let me just take a moment here and just think, okay. I will be sharing the extreme heat video with you. Actually, I'll have some support with the staff here, but I did want to highlight, because Yale Climate Connections came up frequently in the last 2 days, that there's a there's a lot of resources, and basically this is like the resource list, but this is a solid resource that you might use with your students. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the slide deck now. I teach with intention tab management to my students for just this kind of teaching. So showed you how to view the resources. And now what I'd like you to do, there's a technique that I use when I taught my students virtually. It's called waterfall. And basically what you're going to do in the chat is enter what is your favorite way to cool off on a hot summer day. So the purpose of this is to already build in, before we start talking about extreme heat, that there is joy on a hot summer day, that there are some things that we can do to cool off. It will also then populate our driving question board. So I'm going to go ahead and ask for you to do that. And then I'll ask one of the other participants to help me monitor the chat and maybe just jump in and share a couple of the things that have been said. So
Leigh, I can read them off for you. And we have about 7-ish minutes left.
Okay.
But we have to sit in the shade, go in the basement, swimming, sit by the river, a waterfall, take a cold shower, water mist fan, go for a swim, ice cream, swimming, tall, cold glass of milk.
Great.
Swimming.
Thank you. We've got, so we've got to start that there's a lot of water. And I find that to be true. So then we can, we can use that, we can leverage that concept of water later on. So then we begin to populate our driving question board with some that becomes really heavy with joy right at the start. Then the first lesson in the series is about the dangers of extreme heat. And students use a variety of resources for understanding how can I adapt to extreme heat? What is the definition? And I am now going to ask Victoria to share this source, whose voice is being centered in your science unit. So Victoria, yep, thank you.
And I forgot to share sounds. So let me do that again.
And I'd like to give a shout out to PBS for their fabulous resources. And this is one of them.
Neighborhoods are ovens with windows. And as the knob on global warming increases, lives are preheated until a soul souffles. Pancake stack projects are poured over with a humid as thick as molasses. Heat and humidity are the perfect appetizer on death's plate. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet from May to October, and senior citizen discount is every day. If thermometers can measure temperatures, they should be able to measure human anxiety. As the temperature rises, we reach boiling points. Attitudes of those around us rise quicker than mercury, and the pressure of staying cool causes us to explode. Compressed living complexes circulate heat and cause compressed feelings to converge upon our neighbors in the hood. So that 90% release of excess body heat talked about in science class is contributed to our local temperature rising. We crack open fire hydrants until we hear lights crying, raising taxes by lowering our body temperature. And if you couldn't afford a wind replacer, fridges and freezers were propped open until your two brothers' faces are frozen. Audiences applaud the ice cream man once that familiar jingle mingles with our ears.
Thanks. So I'm going to go back, and I think do I need to reshare my screen now?
You do.
All right. And what I've learned is I also have to enter a password. So I'm hoping that I won't have to do that again. Is it all good? All right, so it's a fabulous resource. I showed it a few times with my students, and from there, the connecting point, and that we just heard that part of the lyrics or the poem, the art. If you couldn't afford a wind replacer, fridges and freezers were propped open until your two brothers' faces were frozen. I had my students act that out afterwards. Some of my students when I used Open Syed as the thermal energy original unit, this is an image a student put on the driving question board, so I could use that as the connecting point. Going in and talking about oppressive weather, then using that as a catch to oppressive discussions of oppressiveness as in pursuit of criticality, students writing with that. Then we get into solving and actually introducing the next lesson 2, introducing the heat island phenomenon. So then from there, what story does the graph tell? Where is our identity? Rural, urban, suburban, and that storyline is all available on WiseLearn. Heat island phenomenon, compare rural, urban areas, causes using data collection. Then we resolve the phenomenon. And interesting, like one difference for rural, when we talk about wind turbines, my students knew that they were for generating electricity, but they had a misconception that wind turbines could also be used to cool, like how they're trying to resolve that. This part of the graph right here. Oh, wind turbines might be keeping rural areas cooler. So then we went into project-based learning using those infrared thermometers and resolved the thermal energy storyline. And then we built project-based learning around it. So green roofing. One student just really did a deep dive into the pursuit of criticality and joy by examining beauty on her and creating beauty on her birdhouse. How does the amount of green space differ in rural versus urban areas? I had a student visiting Chicago and she built her project around that. How do trees lessen the heat island effect? How does extreme heat affect animals in the car? So then that came from a driving question board. Why is turf hotter than grass? How does socioeconomic inequalities affect people? And then we used the Yellow Taxi, or I think that was the name of it, a song that talks about the paved parking lot, right? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. So kind of that opposite of concept. And this person analyzed the lyrics of that song. So heat island equity, reaching students where they're at. This is one of my students who is at a first, second grade level, and her speech teacher, we co-taught this with her. One of my students, and we talked about color scales. Jose brought up color scales. One of my neurally diverse students went deep dive onto that, and he took a photo off the internet and then some of the imagery we had done over vegetation within the project, and made what he thought the roof would look like using thermal indexing. Rich layered text, eco-anxiety. This book talks about eco-anxiety. The dog gets so overwhelmed, he literally sits down in the crosswalk, and then his owner takes him to the beach. So how do we get to outdoor spaces? That deep dive into identity and criticality then allowed us to bring up questions. How does the skin color of humans affect how we react to heat? How does the fur of different animals? What happens to me in a car? Do I absorb the energy? And all of this really started from 2 questions. I put these 2 slides in for you to look at later. Specifically, how does the unit address each of the pursuits? And basically, student curiosity fosters the pursuit of identity. Relevance can be harnessed as we in the student's pursuit of intellect and skill, and then student agency and ownership empowers that criticality piece. So my very last slide for you is just for infrared thermometers, because I know that that's going to be next, ways that they were used in this unit. And there we go. I am set. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions, and use that resource.
Okay, so during this session, we are going to do the counterpart to what I was presenting on with Wiki and the other resources this morning, and dive into a little bit of traditional ecological knowledge. We will review a few of the things that Kat Techman had shared in her presentation yesterday and at some other presentations, but we won't dive too deeply in them. But instead, we're going to focus on an activity that Kat has used that was developed by Hannah Panshee. I don't know if anybody attended her session on Monday from Glyphwick. She also didn't use this in her session, but it's a fantastic activity to get conversations started about climate change and the impact on beings, and not just looking from the human perspective. So after we do that activity, we'll dive into just a few other resources related to traditional ecological knowledge, and give you time to think about how you might be able to use some of those. So looking at the next slide, before we begin, we just want you to take a moment to think about some things that you have noticed that have changed over time. And specifically think of things that might be connected somehow to climate. So not, like what's on TV or the way we communicate through, phones versus text versus computers and things like that. But things that could be linked to climate that you have noticed changed over time. For instance, I remember I grew up in southern Wisconsin, and I remember it seemed like there was snow all winter, and that every time I walked out my front porch, I couldn't see over the snowbanks when I was little. And now I live about 3 hours north of where I grew up, and the snow doesn't stay all winter long. Like, we've had maybe 2 winters since I've moved here where we've had the snow not melt from when it first started to when spring came. And so that would be kind of an example of the ideas that we're looking for. So if you want to just take a few minutes, we can, or Victoria already has put the full presentation link in the chat, so you can contribute your thoughts and ideas there. And we'll just do that for 1-2 minutes.
And just to mention, there are 2 slides of this, so you can choose either slide 57 or slide 58 to record your thoughts. So we wanted to make sure everybody had at least one sticky note to write on. And I'll just, I'm going to share the full slide deck here so you can see it populate if you're not looking directly at the slide. And thanks for dealing with the font size. It looked really pretty at that size with just 2 words, but when you put a whole paragraph on there, we have to make it smaller. So we appreciate you.
All right, if you want to take a moment and just kind of read through some of the things that we've noticed. And as you look at them, you can see that some of these still relate a lot to some of the scientific knowledge that we could gain from the wiki maps and the GLISA maps, like the snowfall and lake ice and things as it relates to humans. But we're also noticing some people sharing some things that have more of a connection to other beings, like fireflies seem to be more prevalent in the past than they are now. Or even, connecting to deer season and the time of year. Our deer seasons are built around certain times that are of ecological significance in the cycles. And there used to be snow during some of those times, and now there isn't. Ticks in that, not remembering them being as prevalent as they seem to be now. Notice that some people too talked about the change in discussions about climate. You didn't hear about it, now you do, or skepticism, now people thinking about it more. Just taking a look at a few of the other ones. Oh, I like this. My mom always said lilacs bloomed for mothers around mid-May, which was generally true. Now I notice them blooming much sooner in response to warmer temperatures. And that, so lots of great ideas too. I know, like when you look at the ice, one thing that I didn't record, but up by Madeline Island, they have data that goes back years about when the ice roads opened up every season and when they closed every season, in the last ferry trip to the island. And there's been definite change around that. And so what we're going to do right now is look and zero in on some of the ideas that were shared out more about other beings, and looking at how what we're learning about climate change throughout our state and Michigan, and even actually this activity really focuses a lot on beings that are significant to the whole Great Lakes region in some way, and look at some of the impacts being felt by those beings. So Victoria, if you want to advance to the next slide. So, just pointing out here that when we're looking at the term beings versus species, we're looking at beings as if they're equals and important in the web of life, more so than when we give species a name and we categorize and classify them. And so we're talking about a relationship when we talk about beings, more so than when we use the word species. And I just realized there was a chat.
That's okay, Gina. We can
that I messed.
Yeah,
okay.
we can skip that.
But all right, so but
we'll run out of time anyway.
Yeah, once we shared, but the idea of traditional ecological knowledge. So we're going to look to the beings and see what kind of knowledge that our indigenous populations have known for years because of this relationship that they've had with the beings. And so before the break, we asked you to look at a card that was designated for you to view related to a being. And we're going to now take a look at an activity that goes along with that called Beings on the Move. And you will have the link to this activity, and we have a printable PDF version of it, so you can print it and use it with any of your students. Currently, it's kind of gathered or created for like a 4th to 12th grade. You could probably stretch it down to 3rd grade with some support, maybe 2nd grade. I know that Kat was working on creating one that would be for earlier elementary with less reading. So we will share that too if and when that comes available. But the goal of this is to look at the climate change effects that might be felt in this region and how they will impact culturally important beings, which then also can impact the lifeways of the Ojibwe and the Menominee people. So one thing that we've done at KEEP is we've adapted this activity to include the significance to not just the Ojibwe tribe, but to the Menominee tribe as well. And we will share this. So if you want to adapt it as well to include any other tribes that are closer to your homelands, you can do that. So what you're going to do is on your card, we're going to first have you share out about your being and its habitat and its significance. And then once everybody's shared out about their being, I'm going to read some scenarios that have to do with climate, and you would be looking at the back of your card then, and you'll take steps in a form that we're going to use to show what is happening to your being when we do or when we experiences these impacts of climate change. So the first thing that we'd like to do is we would like to have everybody share a little bit about their being. And so to make it go quickly, there are some people who have duplicate beings, so just whoever kind of unmutes first can share about that. But we'll start with, and we'll just go in order in the PDF, if somebody can share about the walleye. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. And so that's the first part of the activity that you do with students, is you have them introduce themselves. And we always like to try, none of us know all the pronunciations of the names. I think Cass is pretty good at it, but we at KEEP are all new to this activity. But it's nice to have students try to, sound out the pronunciations and give it their best effort. And so in person, what you would do next is you'd have the students all line up in a long line in a big open space, preferably outdoors, but you could do it in a larger classroom or a cafeteria or a gym space. And what you would do next then is the teacher or leader of the activity, which I will take on that role today, would read about some of the climate impacts that we're seeing in this region. And when that impact was read, and this would be on the second side of your card, so if you scroll down to the next page, it will share what happens to your being when there are increasing temperatures or drought or increases in predators or pathogens, diseases, and parasites. And on that card that you have, it will give you a number of steps that you're supposed to take. And so the more steps that you take shows the greater an impact that climate impact will have on your being. And so we're going to just play. We don't want to take the entire time we have here for this activity, but we want to show you how you can also do it virtually. So the school that I worked at was participating in this activity with Kat on a year that we were not able to go visit her up at the Apostle Islands National Lake Shore. So we had to do it over the online. And so one of our teachers came up with this idea of a Google form. So if you open up the Google form, that's Victoria linked in the chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first one. So the first one says increasing temperatures. Air temperatures are expected to increase in all seasons, but particularly in the winter. Water temperatures will increase too, in many cases more than air temperatures. Now, your being will have a number of steps listed after warmer temperatures. Might be take 2 steps or 3 steps. What you would do is you're going to fill in this form for however many steps. So if yours is taking 1 step, you'd click on the image, hit submit, then you'd click submit another response, click on the image, hit submit again. So if you had 3 steps, you do the survey 3 times. If you don't have any steps, you don't take the survey at all. If you have 1 step, you just do it once. And then Victoria has a live graph that's going to show us the vulnerability of the different beings in a bar graph so that we can see different beings are impacted by an increase in temperature in different ways. So let's take another look. We'll just do 2 or 3 to look at these. Let's take a look then at, we'll do drought and extreme precipitation. Let's do drought first. So drought, the description for that is that we can expect longer dry periods, particularly in the summer. So look at your information related to drought and fill out the form for however many number of steps you would take. And then let's look at kind of the opposite of drought, or the in between the drought times. We're going to have those extreme participation events. And so if you want to look at that one, it says we can expect more rain to come in the form of large rain events, which increases, or with inches of rain that may cause flooding. So if you want to record the number of steps that would be impacting your being there. And as you see, we have the vulnerability really showing up even after only 3 different indicators. You can see which, if you can look at the, I don't know if you can look at the titles of the beings listed there, but if you look at wild rice or manumin, it's already up to 6 after only 3 of the impacts. The moose also is up to 4. The lake sturgeon is at 5. American martin is just behind with the snowshoe hare and the paper birch. And so on the card, you saw the significance of many of these beings. And we see that, you know, in addition, oh, and yeah, some people are probably reporting on the same beings, which might affect the bar graph. I do know just from my own past experience that manumin is probably the most significantly impacted being by climate change. And lake sturgeon, the martin, and I know that the snowshoe hare are also ones that are significant beings that are significantly impacted as well. So yeah, you would want to, if you're using this online one, you'd want to have a way to differentiate how many people are being each being. But in person, you see each person just taking those steps. And so where you see the graph spread out here, you'd physically see people at different locations in the line. And as you wrap up that, you would then chat with people and your students about the discussion questions that we have on the next slide, about which being was the most vulnerable and the least vulnerable. Were you surprised by any of that vulnerability? What do you think it means for people who have treaty rights to harvest beings and depend on them for so many things, especially if they're within a certain territory or a reservation? And did these beings have any special meanings for you? And then always ending with the discussion of what can we do to help these beings? So what are some solutions? What are some actions that we can take to protect habitats, to protect the beings themselves, or also to reduce our carbon footprint and our impact in that way? Do you have any questions about the activity? I know we just kind of zipped through that last part, but I want to make sure that we're able to share some of the other resources. So some extensions that you can do after this activity to further student understanding. The first one that's showcased here is the Glyphwick Vulnerability Assessment. And I believe that Hannah and Kat maybe both shared a little bit about this resource. It's a long document, but in the middle of it, it has all the data and information, and I see it's taking a little while to load, but it has all the information that was used to create the Beings on the Move activity. The Beings on the Move activity actually only has about 20 beings. It's from the first assessment. This is an updated one that I believe features over 60 beings, and it categorizes them as swimmers, four-leggeds, plants, and flyers. So you can look into that and have students do more research on their being, or maybe create a little poster or an informative, sheet about their being that could be shared with others. This is, it's a very, very lengthy document, not one that you would probably just give and say, read it, but definitely something that you could use for students to do some extra research or additional research on. And one thing that we know from experience with the polar bear is when people can rally around a being, we tend to get a little more activism or people engaged in the discussions and the conversations. So this would be the sheets that show the vulnerability. And then Victoria, if you want to scroll down to one of the examples, they will have a more detailed explanation of each being and the some of the reasons behind the impacts that the being feels. For those folks who are from Michigan, on the next slide of the presentation, there was a Michigan Tribal Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment and Adaptation Planning project report that was done as well. They do, some of the tribal nations do link to Glyphwick as well, because that has member tribes from several Ojibwe nations, some of which are in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. But this would be a document that you could use with your students. It's not quite as long as the vulnerability assessment from Glyphwick, and doesn't have quite the same amount of information, but definitely something that would show the research that's being done in your area as well. We are running short on time, so I'm going to skip this next activity where we were going to just have you put on Post-it notes how you might use this, because I do want to just highlight a couple other things. If you didn't go to Kat Techman's presentation on GWOW, I do have some information here on it. And specifically, I have some links to activities that I did with my students. I was a middle school teacher in Marathon, Wisconsin for about 10 years, and I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. And so here's some activities that I did using GWOW. Some of them are actual slideshows. Other ones are actual products that we used. The first, like, mystery gallery walk was just a climate collage of pictures where we didn't tell kids what they were looking at. And they did some of the, like, the silent gallery walk, took notes on it. What do I notice? What do I wonder? And then we eventually went into exploring the traditions. And then they did eventually write some arguments about whether climate may impact what they are doing. And then they go into either creating an I Can Change Climate poster, My Climate Story, which is a documentary. And I wanted to show it, but we were running low on time. So I'm going to let you watch that sometime on your own. But one of my students, Sylvia, she was in 6th grade when she made it, but it's fantastic. It's about 2 minutes long. And she talks about how she would feel if climate has a negative impact on her tradition of cross-country skiing. And then turn it around cards. That's something that the school has adopted as their product since I have joined the center. So just some great, real applicable ways to use that GWOW model right in your classroom, and resources that you're welcome to take and use. Victoria, did you want to hop in and talk at all about Minneson?
Yep. And I just wanted to mention that the GWOW website was created about 10 years ago. And it's really like, it's something that your students could use like as the web quest, like they can walk themselves through it, or you can walk through it. Like it's for youth or adults. It's like a complete curriculum, but there's also lesson plans like hidden in there for teachers. So really rich resource to just kind of spend some time on and dig into. And Minneson, neither Gina or I have been able to use this in our classroom because this was just done this last year. So Minneson was created again by UW Extension with Kat Techman to really look at how climate change is exploring the Apostle Islands ecosystem. And so again, this is another really rich resource that you can bring into a project. You can have students do some research around it. When you get into that, when you get into the website itself, it breaks down all of the different ecosystems that are present in the Apostle Islands, which that in and of itself might like just be eye-opening for students that there are these different places available. But then we have pronunciations, and then we get into the plants and animals of each of those ecosystems so that we can learn a little bit more. And there's always supporting materials. So here's a nice video here. And then there's some additional take action links, and then other videos and audio that you can use to support that for multimodal learning in your classroom. So just another really great site to be thinking about, how can I bring that into my classroom? We don't have time to dig into it. We had probably 3 hours of information packed for 45 minutes. So I'll flip back to the slides. And then the last one we wanted to share with you is this resource called Harvest of the Moon. And this comes from another extension project with the Menominee Nation, and it's looking at the 13 moons and thinking about how the moons, and when we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge, right, and how this language has developed over this really long period of time, right? Like we started out the question just thinking about in our lifetime, what did we see then? What did we see now? But we're talking about like whole cultural belief systems, language systems that have developed over time, integrated with this place, and how now these moons are not necessarily all reflective of what is present day, of what that moon means. Gina, do you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, and it was developed in the Menominee Nation in part to try to reconnect them to their foods, and as part of health and wellness, and that that idea that, you know, it was in Menominee County and the Menominee Reservation of all the counties in Wisconsin was the most unhealthy, and they had the most health concerns. And so they're like, how can we help our people do better and be healthier? And the idea was to connect them back to their natural foods. And so they approached it by looking at these moons. But as they came up with this approach, they also noticed, well, some of these things are changing. And so they have this resource for educators and community organizations to use. And I think it'd be great, you could focus on it month by month, or you could have student groups each pick a month and dive in and share it with others, but just to really help understand how, as Victoria was saying, for many centuries, this information was passed on from one generation to the next generation. And now we're finding generations that have to, make modifications and adjust and learn, from that experience. So it's a great resource also for cultural foods and art, because that's in some of the coloring pages too.
My name is Kim Tallarico, and this is a section on integrating climate justice. I get to talk about my position, which is climate justice instructional coach for Milwaukee Public Schools. I have a job that I absolutely love, and I can't wait to share with you today some of the initiatives about what I get to do in my work and how I get to incorporate climate education into existing curriculum. We are the largest school district in both Wisconsin and Michigan, so it's kind of cool to see what can actually happen, and I'm super proud to be able to share the things that we are doing with sustainability and climate education. It's my intention over just the next few minutes to just really provide you with some of that hope and possibility of what can really happen in a large district or small district for that matter. And when I'm done, you're going to be able to hear from students from both McFarland High School and South Sheboygan High School. And you'll get to hear what's possible when mini grants are used to complete some cool sustainability school projects as well. Next slide. So how is all of this stuff happening in Milwaukee Public Schools? In 2020, the MPS School Board passed a resolution. It was entitled Our House is on Fire. That was based on the book by Greta Thunberg's book, Our House is on Fire. And this resolution allowed for the creation of a district sustainability team. That team now consists of an amazing engineer, Heather Dietzel. She is here with us today. She's the sustainability projects manager, and she oversees the green and healthy schoolyard projects that you saw that Jose was talking about, along with Reflo. She also does a myriad of other responsibilities with sustainability practices in the district. She was also able to be joined this year with another second project manager. Her name's Shannon Arms, and she's focusing on landscape, and she's a landscape architect that works with similar projects. The same resolution also allowed for the creation of my position as climate justice instructional coach. And it's my job to infuse climate education into already existing curriculum. I'm working kindergarten through grade 12 and working across all content areas. I also work with a climate justice advisory committee, and that's composed of district coaches and community members. It works with teachers, and really we try to move the curriculum work forward throughout the entire district. I also get to work with school green teams, our facilities and maintenance team, our grants office, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. That's very important. School administrators, students, and staff throughout the entire district. And I'm working on various sustainability projects, as well as some science-based things, because I am housed under our science department. So I get to work on STEM fair and vertical farming. I'm working on a grant right now that's installing pollinator gardens and partnering even with nutrition services for food waste reductions and composting and recycling efforts. A lot of these projects are grant funded. I know earlier a couple of people have asked about how funding occurs. And one of our need slides that we had when we posted on our little Post-its, there were multiple people that said, how do you have the money for the type of projects that we had already seen, especially with Reflo? Next slide. One of the important and unique parts about our first resolution is something called a green revolving fund. And this really important part of the resolution is actually a process of where we can document savings from some of our green projects and then request school board funds of equal value. They're then deposited into a green revolving fund account. It's just really a way to offset some of the costs of the project, and then those funds then support future green projects. It's kind of a unique system, and it certainly doesn't fund everything, but it's certainly just a way to offset some of the costs. On the screen, you'll see a clip, not quite yet, go back please. Thank you, of a second resolution. In 2022, we had another resolution that was passed that partners up the city of Milwaukee with Milwaukee Public Schools. So both city and county get involved in this one, and it's on the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Climate Justice Targets, where we are trying to reduce those emissions 45% by 2030 and 80% reduction by 2050. So obviously those are some lofty goals. So the things that you're seeing that MPS is doing is to meet those goals and to meet the resolution parts. The second resolution is also focused on green jobs for our students. So we will be definitely putting a focus on that area as well. Next slide. One of the initiatives is solar panels. We do currently have 5 schools that have demonstration size solar panels. If you're familiar with that, that means about 10 kilowatt panels are installed, and they relay some data. And that data is on a web-based dashboard for students to study. So as you can imagine, that could be lots of math and science, as well as a place where we're getting some of that data for the Green Revolving Fund for earnings, just as an example of one of the initiatives. Another huge initiative that we've already heard about from Jose earlier today was the Green and Healthy Schools. And I would be certainly amiss if I didn't mention part of Milwaukee Public Schools. A huge part of what I get to do and what Heather gets to do as a sustainability projects manager is work with Reflo on our Green and Healthy Schoolyard redevelopment program. Next slide. And Kirsten, I see that you'd love to have a copy. When you get to the slide deck, or if you just press on the quote that I had from the first slide, it actually goes to both of the resolutions, and you can see those in there. And if it's not on the second one, I'll make sure that that gets loaded on there as well. Jose did a great job explaining what Reflo does, but I wanted to just point out his map for the Green and Healthy Schools was also infused with the heat map. So I wanted to just show you our school locations throughout the district that have the schools in the program. You'll see that there are now 36 total schools in our Green and Healthy Schoolyard redevelopment program. 21 are already under the maintenance and stewardship phase, which means their yards are done and they are working on maintaining those yards. 5 more schools are in Cohort 5. They're doing construction, which set off this summer. The minute the kids leave school, the construction starts. Cohort 6 is in the fundraising phase. You heard Lisa Neeb talking about raising the money, and these are not obviously cheap endeavors. So raising that $6 million, that's part of that fundraising phase that 5 different schools are part of right now. And then Cohort 7 are our newest schools. 5 schools are added on every year, and those are our newest schools. And they're added on and deciding on what to put into their school yards. How do they want to use that space? What do they deem most important? Next slide. As you can see, I think Jose actually showed us this, but I wanted to show you this slide as well. This is Hawthorne Elementary, and this is their after photo. I want you to just picture for a minute an entire yard full of asphalt, and now you can see all of the greenery that you see around you in front of you there. But I picked Hawthorne because it's one of my favorite. It's one of the newest cohorts. Their schoolyard was just finished in 2022. And as it was completed, they put an outdoor theater as part of their redevelopment. It's smack in the middle there. You can see kind of a little curvature. They put an outdoor theater in there as part of their redevelopment project. And this spring, 3rd graders were able, to put on a play outdoors. Their 3rd graders put on display for students and staff, and community members came. It was just absolutely adorable. But again, what a cool way to use this outdoor space. And I loved that this space at Hawthorne represented a way that not just one of my personal favorites, but it was a way that we're integrating the climate education, not just with science and math and the literature, the things that we've been talking about today, but also a cool use of integrating the arts. That was something that was really important to me when I got hired, that we look at all content area and maybe even some things that we wouldn't just necessarily considered. So one of the things that I worked on extensively this year was working with our MPS art integration teachers. Next slide. And we did a project this year where we are putting in pollinator gardens on 3 school sites. Those pollinator gardens then have students and staff that need to learn about the importance of our pollinators. Here you'll just see some sketches that we did with a book by Shabazz Larkin. In the lower left-hand corner, he did a book entitled The Thing About Bees. And this was a great springboard literature activity in kindergarten through, we did about grade 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 middle school, we did some more video and some different other components of a lesson plan that were a little bit more difficult, but we use this book as a springboard for all students. We had over 600 sketches of bees done by K to 8 students, and then installed an art project that stayed up for over a month during Pollinator Month at Havenwood State Forest here in Milwaukee, where lots of people got to come in and check out information on pollinators and being kind to pollinators. Next slide. To wrap up some of the concepts on the Green and Healthy School Redevelopment Program, I just wanted you to check out some very cool numbers that we had. I know Jose didn't get to share everything, but look at that. We have over 3,000 trees that have been planted so far. The amount of asphalt that has been moved has just been phenomenal, and native habitats restored. And of course, over 1 million gallons of stormwater treated. So we're keeping those out of our lakes and rivers here in the city. As Heather and I are both on now. I know Lisa and Jose had to go, but absolutely, I'm sure between the two of us, we could answer any questions between the Green Revolving Fund or the Green Schoolyards when we're finished with our session as well. Next slide. A really cool initiative that we're part of and very lucky to be a part of is a over $1 million grant that was awarded from the Environmental Protection Agency that we'll be working with over the next 3 years. UC Reflo, the Wisconsin Bike Federation, the Medical College, and MPS are all teaming together for basically what is a 3-part grant. We're going to be looking at the effects of green and healthy schoolyards. We just had Reflo explain, and you've seen some pictures of this amazing work being done, but we want to know how the effects of these spaces, how is that affecting our students? So one research area is using movement and monitoring equipment, even some of the temperature equipment that you saw today that you had got to use today. Also air quality monitoring equipment, data collection, as well as some observation. And we're gathering information about how students use those play spaces, how they spend their time at recess. Another grant area is showing teachers how to use this new outdoor space. So the Bike Federation's coming in and showing things from traffic gardens, environmental education lessons are being done from Reflo. They have really cool what's called discovery education carts, and they come out and use components in their carts to show students how to use that outdoor space. And that's really a good component that I'll share with you in the chat. That's part of our MPS site for our Green and Healthy program, where that'll be linked to, you'll see all the different things along the side. There's a video from Reflo just explaining a little bit more about that program. A third part of that grant is actually going to be involving teacher training. We know that in order to best prepare our students to understand the climate change, we really need to educate our teachers as well. So the third focus that the grant will supply and support will be to prepare teachers to teach climate education and health equity standards. So I personally am really excited about this part because I'm currently working on building that curriculum. It will be 10 hours of professional development that will prepare teachers to implement all the things that we've been talking about. This school year alone, we'll get to focus on 30 teachers this year, and then 30 teachers for year 2 and 3. I would love any feedback or comments, or please feel free to email me any ideas that you have to build that curriculum, as that is truly being a model, hopefully, that all of you would be able to use down the road. Next slide. We're also working on a really cool initiative with the Climate Justice Curriculum Advisory Committee, where we are building a library now. In the fall, in September, we will have 110 MPS schools that are going to be receiving a climate education library. So this will be a library section in each library in the district for K-5 schools. Yes, Heather, I do have that school list available. We are working on a few things on it right now, so it's a work in progress that will be done when the books come out, and hopefully even before the school year begins. But the cool thing about this list is I can absolutely share this list with you, but then I'm also having our team work on a digital list as well, as the books then will get linked to a YouTube video that will show it, so you can put it right into your Google Classroom or Seesaw, as well as an actionable item, kind of a suggested activity, but it will be based on an action item, because I really, really want to provide that hope for our younger students as they do collective action within their classrooms, and have that also linked to a standard. Victoria, you wrote that it sounds like something that could be put into a type of climate education hub. I think that's a great idea. So I love that you have that idea for something like that, because Victoria, myself, the Department of Public Instruction, and a nonprofit that we've partnered up with, Subject to Climate, we are super proud to announce today that we are soft launching a Wisconsin Climate Education Hub. So this will be a resource area that you will be able to find lessons that are science vetted, teacher vetted, science backed lesson plans that have been prepared by teachers around the state that will be place-based, so that you can have all the stuff that we've been talking about for the last 3 days, how does this affect Wisconsin students, and how can we best have those lessons reach you? It will be a way for you to find every subject, every grade level, every content area. We hope that students will ultimately be inspired then to understand the world around them, and we can really foster this next generation of climate action takers with this website. So we're super excited to launch this. It's been a good work in progress. And as we build these lessons, for example, I'm currently working with 10 teachers. Some of them are on here right now in Milwaukee Public Schools, and we are learning from Subject to Climate how to best vet these lessons so that they are sound lessons for all students in the state to be able to use. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Izzy right now so that we can hear about not just MPS, but other districts in the state as well, and how they're using some of these initiatives.